noon deadline for China to begin some sort of discussion came and went. Will we now see 104% tariff against China?
Well, very simply, this is about the President of the United States defending the core national security interests of the United States. China has hollowed out our defense industrial base. This is very important for your viewers to understand. America cannot create the essential materials it needs to ensure our security into the future because China has stolen those supply chains. So America, but not just America, our allies around the world are dependent on China for our own defense, for our own economic well-being. That is the national security threat the president is responding to. And he's going to take whatever actions are necessary to ensure that he can keep America safe and that we can live in a country in which American workers and American factories can supply all of the materials and needs for our national security and defense.
The question was, will we see a 104% tariff on China since they're not biting on Trump's short-sighted ploy to implement cartoonish tariffs? But thumb-faced Stephen Miller was in the mood to yell instead of answering the damn question.
Yeah, no.
And by the way, we are on the verge now because of President Trump's strength and leadership of fixing our entire global trading system. This is an astonishing fact. Did you know, for example, that we have a $50 billion trade deficit with Japan alone in automobiles? Here's the country we protect. Here's a country that we defend. Here's a country that's an ally and partner of the United States. Why is it that we have a $50 billion automobile deficit with Japan and another $50 billion automobile deficit with South Korea? Our troops are stationed right now in South Korea, keeping them safe and free. Our troops, our soldiers, away from home, away from families in South Korea. $50 billion automobile trade deficit with that one country alone. President Trump is going to fix our global trading relationships. And at the same time, he's going to work with Congress to make America the manufacturing center of the world with the lowest taxes, the lowest regulations, and the cheapest energy.
And even Martha McCollum was like, yo, shut the f up with your whining and complaining, bro. Actually, it's useless to have consumers, economists, and business people that are actually affected by their agenda that's fueled by their emotions and white supremacy tell them the reality behind why our forces are stationed all over the country and why Australia doesn't want to buy our beef or why Americans buy Japanese cars. Everything to the most powerful little babies in our country is a complaint when everyone doesn't just blindly go along with it. They don't know how to do better because they've never had to. And now it's on full display for the entire world to see.
And I'm curious what you can share about this strategy, because if you reorganize the trade relationships with so many of our larger partners, Canada, Mexico, Japan, all of these different entities who in varying degrees have agreed to some sort of discussion at least, does that isolate China? Because we know that China has found other routes to go through, Vietnam, Cambodia, and will these trade agreements mean that China becomes even more isolated?
Yes, well, this is part of the brilliance of the president's strategy. If you look at those original reciprocal tariff rates that were announced, who got hit the hardest? China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. That's the China sphere of influence. The true trade deficit with China is $1 trillion a year because China is shipping all of its goods through other countries like Vietnam, like Cambodia, like Thailand, but also it's sending its supply components through the EU as well that they're then making into our markets, through Canada, through Mexico. China is the destabilizing force here for the entire system of global trade. And everyone's put up with it, Martha, everyone. The EU's put up with it, Mexico's put up with it, Canada's put up with it, Japan, Korea, everyone. One man, one president has said, we are not going to let China extort, dominate, and control our entire system of international trade through cheating. All those factories that have closed over all those years because of China's cheating, someone is actually finally saying we're going to bring those factories back home.
They have a lot of aspirations about how they'll force the rest of the world to bow to their demands. But when you listen to thinking people detail how long and how heavy a lift it is to renegotiate every tariff deal with each country individually, you start to wonder why they don't care about how much this will actually affect the prices of everyday items for an undetermined amount of time. What's really putting a bug up Steve Miller's ass, though, is that some of their billionaires and business people whose eyes lit up when they thought that they had the opportunity to pillage working class people even more are turning on them as they lose money and support.
Let me ask you this. Obviously, there's an interesting group of people, including Bill Ackman, who did not support President Trump in his first term, but really came to support him over the course of the last election. And they're making their feelings known a bit on social media about how they believe this should be navigated. Obviously, they're not the president of the United States, but this is from Bill Ackman talking about his support for President Trump and his advocacy for a pause. He says, some have misinterpreted my thoughts on tariffs. I'm totally supportive of President Trump using tariffs to eliminate tariffs and unfair trade practices for our trading partners and induce more investment and manufacturing in our country. I am advocating for a 30, 60, or 90-day pause before the tariffs are implemented tomorrow to enable negotiations to be completed without a major global economic disruption, which will harm the most vulnerable countries, companies, and citizens. And he goes on to say more there. What is your response to that, Stephen?
Well, my response to that, in part, is why is it only described by some of our friends in Wall Street as a crisis when we correct and we answer a generation of systemic abuse against American workers? Martha, was it considered a crisis when all of our steel mills were shuttered? Was it considered a crisis when American automobile manufacturers went from dominating the entire global trade in autos to being shrunk to the point of barely having any exports around the globe at all, right? Was it considered to be a catastrophe, a calamity, when the entire Rust Belt was frozen, its industries ripped apart? Was it considered to be an economic catastrophe when we could no longer build a ship in this country, could no longer build an airplane in this country, could no longer build a helicopter in this country, when we couldn't even provide for the basic means to defend ourselves, couldn't even build a Coast Guard cutter in this country, that our supply chains, our industrial base has been so eroded?
Was it considered a crisis when our factories are shuttered, Martha? He's got to be careful not to offend all the rich people that enabled and bankrolled them into power, or this oligarchy will be over before they can say white power. And before they know it, the groveling Republicans in Congress that actually hate Donald Trump but are too spineless to stand up to him might discover that it's better to push back than get kicked out of office by all the people that they've been fooling for decades with their trickle-down economics that still hasn't worked out. So people like Tom Tillis are wondering if their asses are going to be on the line, and they might need to change course.
Everything that we need to do to know what the political environment is going to be about next year, it's going to be done by February of next year. So in your mind, do you believe that over the course of the next 14 months, we're going to have a level of certainty, and the people in the trailer park that I grew up in who are going to bear the brunt of some of these short-term cost increases, maybe some job displacement for a period of time, how are they going to be feeling Groundhog Day 2027 or 2026? Do we feel like the majority of this will be resolved, and I'll be able to thank whoever thought that the alla prima approach was a good idea? Because that's about the timeline we've got to work with.
Well, Senator, these people who voted for the president is the same situation I grew up in. You know that.
I agree, but let me just finish here because I don't want to get in the way of my colleagues. Yes. I'll be 65 in August. Every day, 11,400 people celebrate their 65th birthday. That's 4 million a year. So let's say from 60 to 65, people are looking at their 401k statements. They did vote for President Trump. They voted for me. I hope that they will again in both cases. Well, maybe not the president, but I intend to run for re-election. I'm just trying to figure out if they're going to feel good about this, because a long-term play in American politics and a long-term play in American policy, public policy formation, is about 12 months from the beginning of an administration. I wish you well, but I am skeptical.